was carried out by an individual, not a faith, not a culture, not an ethnicity, but an individual person who was gripped by ideology that is not supported here by anyone or any community. He alone carries the responsibility for these acts. Let that be where the judgment.
Let's go to Melbourne, Australia, and speak to Greg Barton, a professor of global Islamic politics at Deakin University. Professor, thanks so much for your time. Could you explain to us what that Daesh/ISIS philosophy is in terms of wanting to export outside of its original, now defunct caliphate, and that idea of taking terror to other countries?
I think the key element here is back in September 2014, within months of the so-called caliphate being set up, the spokesman for Daesh, ISIS, issued a kind of fatwa legal statement saying you should attack the infidels wherever they are. If you don't have a gun, use a knife, use a rock, use your car. And a spate of attacks occurred around the world as people responded to that call. So you didn't need to be connected with Islamic State. You didn't need to be part of the command structure. A lone actor could respond, and they'd be praised in the magazines and publications of Daesh. And that's what happened repeatedly. And that's appeared to be what happened in this case.
Doesn't, therefore, the act become one that's more political than driven by any sort of perverse interpretation of Islam? Especially, we don't know the religion of this attacker, but if he's a Sri Lankan national, possibly he's not a Muslim.
Well, that's certainly possibly the case in terms of his background. People who have responded to the call of Daesh for these lone actor attacks have at some stage converted to their extremist understanding of Islam. So perhaps he didn't come from the Muslim community in Sri Lanka when he came to New Zealand a decade ago, but he came to the attention of police there 5 years ago, and clearly, beyond what we would see as straightforward politics, had internalized that extremist worldview associated with Islamic State. The police clearly knew a lot about him. They had him under 24/7 surveillance. He'd been before a court. They couldn't keep him in jail. But you sense from the Prime Minister's statement that there's a lot more that she wants to say. She's legally not able to say more, but she will in due course, no doubt.
The withdrawal of American troops after 20 years of their occupation of Afghanistan has brought this issue of Christian versus Muslim really to the forefront again. And in terms of America's war on terror, how much has that fueled the divisions that some people like to emphasize?
Yeah, I would put it a little differently. It's less, Muslim against Christian or vice versa. It's a war within Muslim society where a tiny minority turns and attacks the majority of Muslims and accuses them of not being faithful. It's not called extremism for nothing. It's a very, very small number who respond to this, but it does appeal particularly to young men. And it taps into personal psychology, a desire to be recognized, to be famous, to be liked. So there's a lot of personal issues that go with this, but it provides a very compelling narrative of a cosmic struggle. And it basically says to people who it attracts that your personal struggles and personal failures are not personal. You're victims of a larger struggle. Now, it frames it in religious language, but as I said, it's more attack on extremists on Muslims rather than as an attack on non-Muslims. In terms of the damage it does. Most of the victims, of course, are Muslims, as we saw in Syria and Iraq and in Afghanistan.
How difficult is it to police the building or possibly even brainwashing of such an individual? I mean, you say, that it's the framework might be a religious framework, but if someone hasn't spent time with Daesh, hasn't actually been part of their struggle across the Middle East over the past decade or so, they would probably need to be kind of inculcated in the philosophy online, possibly. So how difficult is it to police that kind of propaganda that people might be watching online, which will then lead them to maybe committing such an attack?
Yeah, look, it's very difficult because, I mean, you're right. There's an online component or a social media component that may be, literally on a smart device as well as on a computer screen. But it's not the video or the individual thing that's been consumed that radicalizes somebody. It's the circle of friends. They feel they've fallen into a new group and people welcome them. There's that social network, which is key to radicalization. But the propaganda material is what gets them in there. And then the question is, how do you detect that happening, and what do you do when it does happen? In this case, apparently there had been an attempt to charge him with preparations for act of terror earlier this year, but New Zealand doesn't have the appropriate laws to make that possible. So they put him under a 1-year community bond, and they put him under 24/7 surveillance, which shows just how worried they were. But they were struggling with answering that question. What could they do to stop him getting into trouble? They didn't realise when he went to a shopping centre that he would, from that shopping centre, pick up a knife on sale in a retail store and use it to stab people. So it's really hard to stop these lone actor attacks at the point of what they use as a weapon. And it's even harder to stop what's happening in terms of the friendships they form online. Clearly, in New Zealand's case, legislation just wasn't adequate to responding to the challenge. But even with tight legislation, it is a real challenge. It's this online radicalization to join a new friendship circle and then go out by yourself committing an attack. That's what Daesh really pioneered as a very powerful way of getting beyond the tight security we associate with counterterrorism police now. So large-scale attacks are very difficult. Terrorists generally get caught. Where we're struggling is with these lone actor attacks.
Professor, really appreciate it. Thank you so much indeed. Greg Barton from Deakin University.